Hey Chris, it's Ron. It's webinar time. How you doing today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. Very excited to dive into the webinar with you today. And today we're going to be talking about some of the core features and some of the detailed nuances of those core features. And for this particular feature, we want you to be looking at not just the actual components of the feature, but also some of the edge cases that might apply to your business. We're going to talk through some examples specifically to this scenario, so you can be thinking about those as we go through it.
Sounds good. So to kick off today's video, we're going to talk about the seller dashboard, and we're going to shred the seller dashboard. I mean, typically when you're talking about a feature, people say, oh, the seller dashboard. Well, not today. We're going to break this into 20 different sections. We're going to talk about all the different things that are in a seller dashboard and talk about its features, the capabilities, the benefits, how it can affect and drive business, and what it means to your marketplace. So let's go ahead and dive in. Chris, it's going to kind of be your, Jeopardy, right? I'm going to throw out things and you're going to go, what is an amazing? And you're going to answer with all the great things that it can do technically, right? So we'll kind of go through these. The first one let's talk about is obviously the self-service, right? Because when you get in the marketplace, I mean, I know some of the marketplaces we've built. One of the last ones we just finished a while back, I remember they signed up and within the first few weeks, they only had 281 vendors in. And I was thinking, oh, they're probably going to grow pretty rapidly. But as soon as I looked in the marketplace, it was just shy of 500,000 products just from those 281 vendors. So I remember these things can blow up so quickly. I remember Go Africa. It was like, so many vendors every single day signing up, right? So these things can get to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vendors and sellers over time. And so one of the things that you can't afford as the owner of the platform is a lot of manual touches with those people, right? You can't be having multiple telephone calls and support phone calls and tech support phone calls with them. It has to be, and this is item number one, a self-service administrative interface, right? They need to have something. So if you would, go ahead and dive in. And what are your favorite or most important things that you feel are necessary when it comes to self-service for these vendors and sellers?
Yeah, that's such a great way to set that topic up, Ron. And I think fundamentally, one of the things that a lot of people miss out on is that maybe somewhere around 30 to 50% of the customer service and support activities can be eliminated, literally eliminated, by having some intelligent tooltips and very opinionated UI that gives some additional information that someone can find by hovering or clicking a hyperlink or expanding, collapsing to see more detailed information. These types of interactions with both the sellers and the buyers within the marketplace can be massive to improve their customer sat, because they can get the information, they stay on track, and they never get sort of off track. And you just want to keep in mind that most of the folks that are interacting with your marketplace, they're not thinking of it like you are, and they're not coming at it from the exact direction that you're coming at things. And so if you can sort of unbias yourself and even try to bias yourself toward having very little technical knowledge or very little knowledge of your specific business operations, that kind of a thing, well, this can be a game changer for your customer's experience. And so in addition to text and instruction and having a strong opinion within the site as the user is navigating through and completing key steps, we also want to make sure that we're notifying them properly. And this is also really, really key to satisfaction and self-service, making sure that we're thinking about as much as we can over just sort of like keeping their expectations set. So like over managing that slightly. We don't want to be annoying. That's probably the last thing we want to do too. But ultimately, I think customers appreciate having slightly more information as opposed to not enough and having to guess. And so these are really low-hanging fruit aspects of self-service. A lot of times when folks see self-service or automating things, they think about complex steps. A lot of times the best place to start is with simple text, simple messaging, simple expand, collapse, and instructions, and then simple notifications that help people consistently understand where things are at. As you sort of go from there, obviously there are things that we can do that are more sophisticated to automate steps, remove steps from the process. If we can take what was a 12-step process and turn it into 4, that's great. And so we want to be asking the question, how can we automate this and how can we integrate these steps? But fundamentally, I would say those are some of the basic thoughts. And we really encourage you to be thinking about this throughout this webinar. What are some of the things that you can do within your business? And you can listen to some of these ideas and thoughts. How can you leverage this within your marketplace in particular?
Yeah, I agree. Matter of fact, I might even bring up, and we've got some other sections coming up here that we'll bring up some pictures from other marketplaces that we've done and do some call outs. And as Chris said, if you put yourself in their shoes, when they come into the portal, what would be important for them? Is it just up in the header? Here's the number of sales that you've had today. Here's how many orders that have been placed that are waiting for you to process. Here's what the sales were the last 30 days. What is the most important information? Just bubbling that up in the header. And I'll pop up a screenshot here of the Go Africa seller dashboard that we did that shows that in the header. For other clients, we're working on another really big site right now. They've got tremendous reports like I've never seen before, heat spots and just crazy stuff that's really cool. And we'll have a full section where we'll talk about reporting. But to Chris's last thing, when he was talking about what could make it easier from 12-step to 4-step, the next thing we're going to talk about is EDI and API integration, right? Because that could do it very easily. Some of the other things we're going to talk about here in a minute are about the order management, the product management, uploading products, uploading images and all that. But with an EDI or API integration, a significant amount of that can be automated, right, Chris? It could be the EDI could be we're popping orders over to them via EDI. They're updating new products, product changes, inventory updates through EDI or API integration, or maybe any part of that. Maybe they're manually doing the products, but we're optimizing and automating orders. Some of our platforms, they use our platform for the orders management. Others, they want to use their own for fulfillment, especially when they're doing drop shipping and there are multiple locations. So let's go ahead, Chris, and dive in and talk about EDI and API integration for the sellers.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. And this one's really interesting because there are a lot of facets to it that we can exploit in a positive way for your business and your marketplace. The number one thing here, like you said, Ron, would be just in general thinking about what we can automate. A lot of times this ends up starting with working with suppliers, depending on how you are fulfilling within your marketplace. There could be the opportunity for you to handle some of the logistics, or that might even be a requirement for you to be able to add value within your marketplace. A lot of our clients that leverage a marketplace type of business model don't do any of the logistics. So it just depends on your scenario. But EDI very commonly, and just general API integration overall, this is going to tend to be at scale a necessity in order to properly execute on the logistics at scale. And what are we talking about when we say logistics? We're talking about shipping, dealing with all of the fulfillment steps and the status of the items, making sure that the items get fulfilled. They get, the proper pick, pack, and ship within different fulfillment facilities, and that it's an intelligent fulfillment from the most proximate location with the inventory that's needed, and making sure it's actually done properly. So reducing human error in this can be massively important, but also coordinating with the lead times on different carriers. So this, depending on the marketplace, for many of our marketplaces, it's going to be intermodal potentially. So you're going to have multiple different shipments that, this fulfillment is going to go through. So it might go through just a standard carrier, to a port facility, to a train, to another standard carrier. It could be LTL the whole way. It could be just an overnight shipment via, an overnight carrier. The list goes on. And so how are we integrating this with the lead times and the inventory data that needs to be relatively real time, if not literally real time for the end user, from the seller? And making sure that that seller has an ease of being able to implement that. And these are some of the questions and the realities whenever you're operating your marketplace at scale. And so fundamentally, I would say APIs are really important, both being able to consume APIs from external partners like carriers, but also being able to present them for some of your sellers so that they can have their team work with the APIs, bulk upload, EDI, etc., and properly take advantage of some of the automation. I won't name names, but I will say that it rhymes. The end of this marketplace rhymes with Ron, and it's one of the largest in the world. And working with their APIs is one of the most challenging, cumbersome processes you could possibly imagine. The documentation is very poor. Just the support and the resources generally, as a rule, there are exceptions to this, but generally as a rule is very, very low support. And it's similar to a rainforest, and the end of it rhymes with your name, Ron. So I'm sure no one knows which one I'm talking about, but just think about like how frustrating it is for sellers to use a platform like that, and how that can cost them literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of effort to properly integrate with. I mean, that is really unacceptable performance. And so we want to be on the other end of that spectrum and be a really bright spot for our sellers and make it very easy to integrate with them. So just as an example, one of the things that we offer at Clarity with our marketplaces is our integration platform. It can integrate with the most common ERPs and basically warehouse management systems that are out there so that we can push and pull this data very easily for the end customer.
Right. Well, and that's, again, your opinion about the one that rhymes with my name there. The reason we know that is a lot of times clients are coming to us asking us to design and build them marketplaces. But then from their omni-channel sales approach, they want us to then integrate and be able to push and sell and report on their products to other affiliate sites, including that one. So we're constantly working with that one. With dozens and dozens of clients. And so this isn't just a thought or a bypassing opinion. It's because we work with it every single day. And so it really is important to understand and have a partner and a solution that really truly understands integrations. I mean, we're 16 years old. We've already done 4,000 integrations. I mean, this is literally what we do. And it's funny because I have a spreadsheet that I track our most recent integrations, because I'll say, we've done thousands of integrations. They're like, have you ever integrated this? And I'm like, yep. And they're like, well, how many times? And I said, well, let me look in the last 6 months. And I can literally bring up a list and show them. And they see this list and they're like, holy cow, okay, well, let's go. So it's really important to focus heavily on the integration being a first-class citizen. It's probably the best way to say it. So appreciate those comments, Chris. Let's move on to the products, right? Because I mean, really the basic thing of the whole marketplace is we're selling products and services. So in the seller dashboard or outside the seller dashboard, whether it's the EDI or the API or whether it's an import, we need to be able to upload and control our products and our pricing, right? I mean, that's really at the heart of the core. You and I each want to sell our own products and services. We're both going to be sellers on this marketplace. How I may want to deal with or handle, or the data that I have, or the format that I have of my products may be very different from you. So the platform has to be able to handle everybody and their disparate and often, we call it dirty data, non-normalized and not perfectly formatted data, right? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing we see with every one of my clients. I've never seen a client come to us to build an e-com platform when their data is perfect. It just doesn't exist. So we deal with that day in and day out. So let's talk about, and we can go back to our platform if we want to say the different things that we can do, but let's talk about some of the gotchas and some of the things that you really want to be able to have as a basic core functionality for maintaining and managing your own products.
Yeah, great question. So I think there are sort of two components of this. One is the self-service and automation that's necessary to scale with the marketplace, because you're going to have the same product coming from different sellers, and they're going to have different pieces of the truth. and some of them will sort of like have less valuable or less accurate information mixed in with more valuable pieces of the truth about that product. So that's sort of a wonderful and enjoyable part of working with different sellers is, they're going to have valuable info, but it's intermixed with good data. And this is a really big problem. But the first thing, to your point, Ron, is just being able to interact with the system and be able to push data into it. And, there are different ways of doing this. I would say there are sort of like three major flavors. One would be manually on an individual level, being able to create products, be able to push the products with a simple interface, as everybody has seen before. And we'll show screenshots here so you can see an example. But fundamentally being able to push basic information about the product, the name, the SKU, the inventory information, pictures, description, meta details, etc. And this can be quite intricate depending on your marketplace, and really necessary that it have enough fidelity around maybe like customer specific pricing levels or roles within the marketplace and pricing. Again, sort of this ability to accurately provide lead times based on where someone is and how proximate they are to fulfillment centers, for example. Being able to set up different information about the dimensional weights of the items so that can happen, that actual shipping estimation can happen properly. The list really goes on. There are a lot of different options. Maybe having a detailed quoting process because this item is really expensive to ship, and it's really not possible to ship it easily without going through a back and forth quote. Maybe it's going to be customized, etc. So being able to allow the seller to sort of select all of these options dynamically, put it into the right categories, provide all of this detail is absolutely critical. So we would typically see this happening in sort of three different flavors. One would be manually, the next would be a bulk upload, and then sort of the final layer typically is some flavor of API integration or EDI integration. So these are sort of levels of progression. And we want to really be able to offer all of these at all times. But at least as a minimum, the manual and then the bulk upload should be sort of like a turnkey default for your marketplace. Like your sellers should be able to have both of these at their fingertips and really easily be able to manage their inventory in bulk as well as on an individual level at will. The other piece of this is foundationally, you're going to want to be thinking about it at least right away, if not executing on it right away, with having an approval process and having a process for dealing with data that's different between your sellers. And Ron, feel free to dive into this one some if you'd like, but the core thought here is, there could be 27 different sellers of this same item. You have to have a way of adjudicating and sort of like reconciling the differences between them. And some of them have more valuable information than what's been published so far. So we want to be able to intake that data, have it go through a reasonable process so that our buyers are getting reliable information about that product that isn't fluff and inaccurate. But we also need to reasonably be able to publish things to the site without having to go through it manually, individually looking at every piece of data that's coming in from sellers as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when a buyer comes in and looks for something, if there are competitive prices in there, they want to be able to see all three of them side by side, right? And so a significant amount of that comes into what we're talking about here in controlling their own products. So, if I want to cheat the system, since I work on SEO, everything Google does is basically to try to counteract what we SEOs do to exploit the system, right? Because we're trying to get our clients' stuff to rank better on the website. So we're doing every tip and trick we can. And then Google sees us exploiting those tips and tricks. And so they change it, right? And that's kind of the way this system is too. So if I come in a marketplace and I'm selling, I don't know, make up your mind, a mower, I'm going to have that in 27 different categories. So if people are browsing categories, my mower shows up because I want to sell it more. But buyers don't want to go in and click on clothing and see Ron's mower showing up in clothing. They would get mad, right? And then I'm going to get in trouble. So how do you control stuff like that? How do you control the sellers from gaming the system, right? And obviously, we're going to talk about governance and things like that in other videos. But the way to do that is to potentially make decisions on how your marketplace is going to behave the best. How am I going to ensure that my sellers upload consistent data? So when people go to compare my mower that I offer against the one Chris is offering against the one that's offered by another vendor, that they have at least the same features and the same pictures and the same size pictures, if you will, so that I can truly compare them apples to apples, because that's really the experience they want. So a significant amount of that can be dealt with in templates, right? So I can have specific templates that are for different types of things. I don't know if you've ever listed anything on Craigslist, but the first thing when you go to Craigslist, it comes up and says, what is it? What are you trying to sell? And it has this radio. You only pick one, and it might be furniture or clothing or whatever. And then based on what you pick in your marketplace, you can upload a pre-done template. So if they come in and I pick a mower, then they may not be able to adjust and assign the categories because it is, or if I click on appliance, then maybe it automatically goes in the appliances master category. And then based on a model number or based on what it is, I can then pick the subcategory that it shows in, or things like that. Or maybe that template requires certain amount of required fields, right? I know if I'm looking for appliances, I don't necessarily have to have, straight Whirlpool through, because I want a Bosch washer or a Bosch dishwasher, right? Because they're so silent, they're so amazing. And I'm going to pair that probably with a KitchenAid oven. But the one thing that they both have to be stainless or black stainless or white or whatever it is, right? So we may want to require certain attributes like finish, so that they put in the white, the black chrome, or stainless steel. They put that in there so that when somebody comes in to search for appliances, they can say, I just want to see all stainless dishwashers available. And all the brands come up, and I can see them all side by side. There's pictures of them and all, and it's easy to compare them, right? So I think coming up with the standards and requirements up front is really helpful in controlling that experience, because it will limit them and help them to ensure that they upload the right size files, the right size images, get them assigned in the right categories, have the right basic, requirement notes for dimensional weights. If people want to be able to calculate shipping and ship to you and you want to increase your sales, you have to fill out the dimensional weight, things like that, or you just require a dimensional weight. And then there's a note that says, hey, if you put the wrong dimensional weight in, whatever shipping estimate is given, you have to honor that because that's what they're paying. Things like that you can force that. Is there anything else you want to add about controlling the products?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we could go on into detail. I think the main idea for folks is that, just like you did, Ron, you want to get into the weeds, especially within your niches that you own, and really think about the nuances. And you want to work closely with the different vendors that you're considering for future projects or your existing team, and just really get into where are you going. And this is sort of the classic question we always talk about, is where are you going over the next 3 to 5 years? What does the competitive landscape look like? This is a huge lever for you to pull on if you want to really further optimize. It's sort of a hidden secret of, improving SAT. So Ron, speaking of optimizing on the product side of things and making it easy for the sellers and the buyers to get what they're after, I know one of the other key aspects of this is optimizing things and really getting into some of the nuances around this. And this is really specific based on your niche. Can be based on the product type. There are a lot of things that you may want to change dynamically and have the ability to do so within different categories or subcategories or product types. To be able to feature those properly. Just curious what your initial thoughts are on this and some of the core tenets that you think of with this area.
Yeah. And the way I like to think about it, one of the things that's unique with our platform is that we allow within a single product catalog, we allow different templates. Why would we do that? Well, if I'm going to buy an alternator replacement for my 69 Camaro, I know what that page should look like. I know the information that I want on the page. But if I'm going to buy a $2.5 million Ferrari GTO 3 GTB4 cam, I would expect that experience to be different, right? If I'm going to a page that's selling a yacht, I would expect that to be very different than an alternator, right? I mean, they're not even in the same planet, but yet in these marketplaces, especially on some of the auction sites that we do, right? I mean, you've got $1 million pieces of art, and then you've got, $3 Pokemon cards, and they're all in the same marketplace. But those types of experiences and those different items that are being sold, items and services, are very, very different. And so what is that experience? How do I optimize? And what is optimization? Well, I've put a few videos up on our channel about optimization, especially when it comes around the data, the attributes, the meta, the graphics, the proper sizing of the graphics, how to compress the graphics. How do you want the graphics to look so they look really good, they look world class without taking a ton of effort on each of your products? How do I optimize for SEO? How do I try to get Google to rank it so when people are looking for something, they find my product on this particular marketplace? Can I optimize my content as a seller on your marketplace to help me drive traffic when I don't own the platform? And the answer is absolutely yes. On-page optimization is big. You may not be able to control some key fields, but you certainly can control the content. So the way the content is, potentially the keyword research that you might do to write the content properly to make sure your content stands out over and above not only other vendors selling on that same platform against you competitively, but against other platforms that might be selling your item too. The layout of your content, making sure the pages look good and the experience is good. So optimizing the data, normalizing the data, optimizing the graphics, compressing the graphics, making sure things load faster, even though you may not fully control the platform, really super important for both you owning the platform, because Google penalizes you on page load speed. And I definitely want you to cover some of that, right, Chris? So sometimes the optimization of the product isn't the seller, and us making sure the template helps them optimize and have the right data, the right pictures, and the right sizes, which it could be, but it might also be working with the vendor to make sure you're optimizing the templates and the page load speed so that they can be properly indexed and everything else, right?
That's right. And there's so many interesting things you just brought up there. So just to start with on the technical side briefly, and I'll keep this pretty high level. The main thing here is that as we talk about in a lot of our discussions with the marketplace, it really should be as automated as possible. And so there should be sort of this strong opinionated stance that the marketplace has on its own of basically optimizing, like you said, images and page load speed. And so the platform itself should really take care of this. And this should be an opportunity for your internal team that's working on your marketplace, and really just something that's foundational with your marketplace software, that it is focused on performance. And that's just a fundamental. If you look at any data research on, UI, UX and conversion rate optimization, it's not just Google, it's also the actual user, especially on a mobile device. And any delays have exponential, reduction in conversion. And I preach to the preacher, of course. So that is foundational. There are so many things that you can do here. It's possible to really easily cache the content. A lot of developers, and I am a developer by trade, so I know this. We tend to overcomplicate things, and like at the end of the day, the search engine and the user, they're just looking for the information that they're looking for. They don't need all this database stuff and all of these 27 calls that are happening and all this complexity. They're just looking for the one thing, and they just need it to load really fast. That's it. Can we please just do that? And like at the end of the day, that's what the business needs and the user needs. And so you have to sort of marry and be looking and sort of be skeptical at all times that this is going to sort of get out of hand if you don't watch it. But sort of marry this sort of technical prowess with just the simplicity of execution. And for me, what I like to look for is, can we cache the content so it's not calling the database at all, really? There may be little parts of the page that are hitting the database, but basically everything that a user, you have a lot of volume and a lot of, traffic on, that should really be cached. And if some part of it's changing dynamically, that gets updated sort of asynchronously, or, after the data loads essentially. But really, it shouldn't be something that's holding the user back when they're loading, and it should be very performant for the search engine. So what does this mean practically? Well, if you cache everything and store it so that it's getting updated, but it's not getting, an immediate call whenever somebody goes to the page, the data hasn't typically changed. Maybe then we update the inventory and the pricing and the lead time dynamically after the page finishes loading. Well, you can go from a couple seconds load time down to a couple hundred milliseconds. And that is a massive improvement in just customer sat and performance improvement. Now, like you were saying, Ron, the other big thing that I want to hit on here is the layout and making it dynamic. One of the beautiful things about a marketplace is at its core, you can almost see it as like a crowdsourcing platform. You're going to be getting feedback and input from your sellers and your buyers constantly. Some of them will be quite opinionated, and they can really dramatically improve the delivery that you bring to your marketplace. At the end of the day, you're in the service of your buyers and sellers, and you're building a sort of meeting point, a marketplace for them to come together. And so foundationally, we want to encourage you to be looking at ways where you can get this input and see it as a crowdsourcing opportunity, and really be able to collaborate with the buyers and sellers over time to iteratively build toward customizations and nuances that they can select. I would say at the end of the day, you don't necessarily want to force people to do things that don't make sense, but they should be able to select them. And like you were talking about with the Ferrari versus the alternator example, I think is a great example. You probably, with a car, you probably want to have a specific template for that people need to go with by default. And with an alternator, it's probably a much simpler template. And that's just the reality. So these areas where there should be a strong opinion, you do need to apply that opinion and enforce it. And that's just the reality of keeping your marketplace consistent. Making it a consistent experience for your user is absolutely important, so they know where to look for things and how to find them on the page. As simple as it sounds, they need to be able to have that consistency is the word throughout the process. The other big thing is, like, what are they looking for on other sites that they're seeing? With an alternator, you're looking for certain things. With a Ferrari, you're looking for certain attributes and details. And we need to be able to optimize around this for the users so that when they go to your marketplace, they need to be able to see what they are looking for without having to think. In particular, we don't want to tax their subconscious CPU at all. We just want it to be like, oh, here's the data, and I don't have to think. This is great. Click. And one of the best ways to sort of get at this is to have a feedback loop and to have a really powerful system that can be adaptive, but have a feedback loop so that we can be, constantly assessing and evaluating the actual performance against that set of goals. So, we want the attributes that someone's looking for to show up. Example, like if we're selling cars and we're on a cars page, we need to be showing things like what's the horsepower? Is it 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive? Is it automatic or a standard transmission? Things like that. If we're looking at an alternator, it's totally different. And apologies, because I don't know all the specs that we would want to look for, but different things about the size, the type of vehicle that it might work with, maybe the ability to produce power and energy from the alternator, things like that. Dimensionality, basic things that we're going to, sorry if you're crying inside, Ron.
It's like me talking about C# and Python.
But the bottom line here, yeah, but the bottom line is that, and feel free to jump in on the details. The bottom line is that they're very different, and the user expects that. And it's really important that we nail it on that. And that is very easy to talk about, not necessarily easy to do. And a part of that, of course, is your data. And we sort of talked about that earlier. The other part of it is your platform, and your platform being flexible enough to handle that data and present it concisely and be on point with these different categories.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's talk about and dive into inventory management, right? A significant amount of optimizing. And we've been talking about user experience and the ease of a user to be able to come to your marketplace and find things, right? And there's usually a couple different ways to lead. Multiple paths should lead to the same results, right? Whether they go to the top navigation and hit a category and click on automotive, or whether they go search and type in alternator, or whether they want to go into the catalog and then start filtering on their car model, make, and year and start seeing products. There might be 5, 6, 7 different paths to the same answer. And you need to ensure that when you sit down and design the experience, not only do you work around that data and help those users find the right results, no matter which path they choose to take, a big part of that's the inventory. So I remember one of the clients we worked with that sold railroad ties, right? And they had 11, if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was like 11 different distribution centers across the US. But they were selling railroad ties mostly to like landscaping companies, but not the small ones you and I would think of. They were selling like 700,000 railroad ties to so-and-so because they're building a new football stadium in Denver. So when they're starting this phase of the construction, obviously it takes a long time to use them all. So they need 50,000 immediately, but the nearest closest warehouse is in Salt Lake. Salt Lake only has 100,000, but they need 700,000. The next closest might be Seattle. So for them, it would be okay because they could order the 50,000 from Salt Lake because that's what they need immediately. They could order the other 600,000 from Seattle and have it coming because they'll be here by the time they need them, but they don't want to run out. They want to make sure they have them because if they don't have that, it blows everything else on the schedule. But if they don't know how many are available in Salt Lake and they just go in and see a massive number and the people supplying that goes, oh, well, we'll fulfill 100 or 50 of them from Salt Lake. We'll send the rest from Seattle. But yet the buyers were all expecting them to be here in the next 4 days. There might be millions of dollars of lost in timing. And that was just this particular client, right? So inventory management is really important on the buyer side. But now all of a sudden you think about it, you own the marketplace and you're now dealing with sellers, and Ron goes in to look for this alternator and there are 7 different sellers selling that same alternator. Do I just say, oh yeah, buy an alternator? What if one can't get me the alternator for 2 weeks, but I need it tomorrow, but only 2 of them offer express shipping? That's stuff that I need to know, right? It's really important to me as a buyer. So I have to have inventory management built into what the sellers and vendors do when they're uploading and maintaining their inventory, and how do they handle. And Chris, I really want you to not only talk about just inventory management in general, but dive into the multi-warehouse, multi-distribution center. How do we deal with the split shipping? You know, Ron goes to said marketplace. I order 3 items. Super simple, right? However, all 3 of those items are from different vendors. So the marketplace has to split that order into 3, send 3 separate orders to 3 separate vendors who are going to ship in 3 different modals. How do we bill Ron for shipping? How do we do ship estimates? There's a lot to unwrap in Ron just buying 3 items, right? 1 item to 2 items can literally change everything, right? Because now I'm talking about multi-vendor on a marketplace, which is a little different than me going on to our local grocery store here in Texas. It's HEB, right? We do our weekly order. It's a lot different than me going in there and buying Campbell's soup and a loaf of bread, because they're both coming from HEB and they're going to deliver it to my house and I schedule that time. So I don't really care. There's no difference in all the different things that I buy in the HEB quote unquote marketplace, because it's one storefront with one fulfillment and one ship time and one deliverable and one inventory location. All the complexities removed. So now we add all that in and it really has a deep impact on inventory. And that's why we've kind of broken inventory out separately. So I want you to dive in and let's start pulling this apart and talking about the different components of it.
Absolutely. And this is a really interesting topic whenever you get to scale, and it doesn't take long for this to become an issue, depending on your marketplace scenario. Probably the biggest thing here is to break it out into a couple of different chunks to focus on. The first would be making sure that the users have the ability to keep that data updated. This is pretty challenging until you have API integrations, and you probably at least want to be thinking about whether or not API integrations for this inventory updating is a possibility off the shelf. And if it's not, how are you going to get there? Because technically, whenever you're dealing with different sellers that are sort of spread out and handling their fulfillment, you may be helping with the last mile of fulfillment. You may be coordinating with different logistics companies to help your sellers with their fulfillment. A lot of our marketplace scenarios will be such that the sellers themselves don't do much of the logistics, and they pay a fee to a partner that does all of the logistics and fulfillment, once the item gets picked up. Depending on your situation, at the end of the day, the common denominator is what is the inventory and where is it located for these different sellers. And we've got to be able to keep that as up to date as possible. So the first thing is we're getting this data, and whenever there is a sale, whenever there is a transaction, we are inside of the marketplace itself. We are persisting that information. So that is going to stay within the marketplace and decrement from the inventory appropriately, immediately, in real time. Then the other thing that we will do is, depending on the way that the integrations are set up with the sellers, we can essentially make a source of truth selection and allow the seller to make that selection as well. So they can appropriately update not just what the marketplace is tracking, but they can in real time go in and push updates that show other inventory changes that have occurred, either increase or decrease in inventory within their different locations. They can essentially update that in real time using the APIs as well. So this is really powerful. Obviously, the sellers will need to pull data in from their orders. So the panacea and the ideal sort of long-term position to be in is that whenever an order is placed, the marketplace sends that to the seller. The seller can have that integrated to their ERP, warehouse management, accounting system. It's decremented out of that system. They may make several other sales externally in some other format. They push all of their updated inventory to the marketplace, and it's this constant cycle that continues where it's always kept up to date. Now, this needs to include, in many cases, multiple locations. This could be, fulfillment locations. It could be logistics hubs where they can forward the inventory. It just depends on your situation and your scenario. A lot of our marketplaces will be a lot, like a lot of items that are for sale, and they're just temporarily in that one location. And once they're sold, they're gone, and that's it. And so we need to be able to handle all of the different types of scenarios where it might be very temporary and not persistent, or it might be that we have multiple locations all over the world and they're very persistent. Now, the other thing about this inventory piece is, like you mentioned, the logistical side of the lead times. And so based on the proximity to the shipping location and where we're sending everything to, we also want to be able to dynamically present to the user how long each of the tranches of inventory will take lead time wise. So this needs to be something that we can have discrete presentation on based on which lead time amounts we're dealing with and even where they're coming from. Letting the user see this can be really helpful if they're ordering in bulk or they have a really sensitive shipment. So a lot of times it makes sense to present it in a really simple format that isn't overwhelming and let them expand it and drill down so that they're not presented with something really overwhelming all at once. But ultimately, the point here is that with integrations and making this inventory data available in real time, it's going to dramatically improve the accuracy of this inventory data. Either way, the system that you're working with should decrement appropriately and increment appropriately based on your sellers making updates. And then ultimately, the user needs to be able to see proximity-based lead times with these different shipments based on the different locations and the real actual lead times that are going to occur. Now, one of the won't go into detail, I'm just going to sort of put it out there, and I know we'll talk about this later, is leveraging machine learning and deep learning so that we can make this even more intelligent. It is really simple to get tabular data, as it's called, around what the fulfillment timeline was estimated to be and lead time was estimated to be and what the actuals were for different sellers, and then present that as sort of like a accuracy score to the buyer. And then in addition to that, sort of like make recommendations to the buyer and the seller about how to handle this interaction. The seller should get notifications. Hey, your lead times are running below, in reality, what you say they are going to, they're taking longer than you say they're going to take. Or you're one of the best. Like you say it's only going to take 3 days and you get it there in one. There are certain things that we can leverage with that kind of feedback loop. But anyway, with that said, there's a lot we can cover on AI in general, and we'll certainly get into that more. But inventory, obviously, if the items aren't actually available, we don't want to sell them. Couldn't be more important, but we want to keep it simple with the presentation and allow the user to drill in if they need more detail.